Hi, I'm Tootsie Ruchinsky. My daughter Becks, such a pain in the tuck, as you should excuse my expression, wrote this book about me and asked me to tell you about it. She calls it the Yiddish gangster's daughter, like she'd know from Yiddish. And she claims it's all about the trauma she suffered when she found out I was a gangster in my long-lost youth. She tells her story, and when I get pissed, she says, all right, you want to say something? You say something. So I wrote something in there, and it's all there, you know, both of our stories, right there. Anyway, I got to tell you, though, about how she found out about my past. Almost had a heart attack. We're sitting on the front porch of this Jewish old folks' home where I live in Miami, and this old broad, this Florence, comes stumbling over with her walker and starts yelling, kill her, kill her. I mean, this woman doesn't know a goldfish from a hole in the ground, and she's claiming I killed her husband 50 years ago? Nuts. All right, so as I tell Becks, yeah, I knew the schmuck, but I didn't kill him for crying out loud. And maybe a few of my associates back then weren't so nice, but the old lady's demented. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Well, Becks was a journalist before she had to stop and take care of her kid. Gabe has, Asperger's syndrome? And I gotta tell you, she also threw out her husband, a doctor, after he cheated on her. One lousy time and he's out. Oh, I say to Becks, you know, who doesn't cheat? You know, your mother didn't mind. It's my daughter, she's nosy as hell, like a dog, she doesn't give up. She starts bugging me, asking me questions, so I tell her a little, but she won't let go. Next thing I know, she's running to the library and the computer, and she's even going to see some of my old buddies who aren't such buddies anymore. She figures out I ran numbers, did a couple of shakedowns, nothing too bad. And you know what? I worked for Lansky's outfit in New York, and loading guns onto ships headed for the independence fighters in Israel, which makes me and Mr. Lansky good Jews, no matter what Miss Smarty Pants says. Anyway, the next thing I know, she's dug up some pretty nasty secrets, and my old mob boss goes after her. Plus, she's got the nerve to accuse me of, you don't need a hearing. And anyway, the broad who helped her write this book, this Joan something or another, wants you should buy it and find out for yourself. It won some awards, the Claymore something, the Amazon breakout, breakthrough, break your butt, I don't know. It's a good read. But enough from me. This Joan Cochran person, Joan Lipinsky Cochran, I think she wants I should shut up so she can talk, which is fine. But my boys are outside making sure you buy her book. Okay, so. Anyway, for those of you who don't recognize me, I am Joan Lipinsky Cochran. This is my second published book. The first was an interlinked short story collection about Black and Jewish relations during Miami's civil rights era, and a lot of the same characters appear. Anyway, I've actually written 4 novels, but never felt that any were good enough to be published until the Yiddish Gangster's Daughter. It's a story, probably gathered by now, of a woman whose life is endangered when she finds out her father was a member of the Jewish mafia. My background is as a journalist, very different from Debbie's. I worked for newspapers before going freelance, and I've published articles or written columns in most of the publications in South Florida, the Sun Sentinel, the Palm Beach Post, the Herald, all the magazines. Anyway, I'm still writing articles, but most of them are now appearing in Jewish publications. I'm focusing on food. My stuff goes in The Moment, in The Forward, and there's a couple of others. Where's my son? I'm gonna nail him. Okay. I decided to write fiction after my sons, I have twins, left for college. Ryan, the one over there, kept bugging me, Ma, you ought to write a novel, you ought to write a novel, we're going to college, you should write a novel, because, I would have nothing to do after they left for college. My life was essentially pretty over, right? Anyway, so I obtained a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing from Florida International University, working with Les Standiford and James Hall, who are sort of important on the mystery scene. I mean, that's why I went to FIU, because they liked, they supported genre fiction as opposed to literary. So the Yiddish Gangster's Daughter grew out of my MFA thesis. In fact, the novel started as a poetry assignment in graduate school. We were told to write a story about, well, not a story, but a free-form poem about someone in our lives, and I wrote about my Uncle Izzy, which is like a perfect name, right? No, the guy's got with a name like Izzy, right? So he was my dad's brother and business partner, and he was a pretty tough guy. The rumors kind of flew in our family. My sisters and I were like, very titillated by all this. That Uncle Izzy had beat up a lot of kids when he was growing up in Brooklyn. He still, by the way, after 50 years, he still had a Brooklyn accent in Miami. Anyway, so he beat up the family rabbi. This is true, I think, because my father had to be couldn't be bar mitzvah. The rabbi wouldn't do it. Anyway, so obviously Uncle Izzy had some friends on the not so good side of the law. And then when I was 9 or 10, my sisters and I were shocked to learn that police had fished the body of his best friend, a man we called Uncle Nat, out of the Miami River, and he was wearing cement shoes. Does anybody not know what cement shoes are? Okay. So that was the end of Uncle Nat. Yeah. Anyway, as with most writers, and Debbie mentioned this also, I start my books with a what if scenario, okay? So, what if you had this perfectly normal dad who went to work in the morning, had a business, came home at night, ate dinner, read the newspaper, and suddenly you find out he's a major criminal, a Jewish gangster, right? So what do you do? Yes, do you hide your head in the sand? No, you go dig it and find out everything you can. So I created this aggressive, persistent woman, Becks Ruchinsky, who'd worked, I've already said it, as an investigative reporter, and learns of her father's past through this Florence, who accuses Tootsie of having killed her husband. Okay, well, Tootsie admits to knowing the guy but denies killing him. Well, as my friend Tootsie a few minutes ago told you, that's all Becks needs to set off on a journey into the Jewish underworld of 40s and 50s New York and Miami. She figures, I don't need this, do I? I'm waving it around. Anyway, she figured out Tootsie worked for a mob boss. Why didn't you say something? She figures out that Tootsie worked for a mob boss, running numbers and racketeering, the whole bit. And Tootsie, of course, wants to paint himself in what he considers a better light. So he talks about beating up Nazis in New York. Is anybody familiar with that story? With Mayor LaGuardia didn't come to the rescue of the, okay. And about loading, sending arms to Israel, Anyway, oops. Sorry about that. Anyway, let me just say that many of these stories, I didn't get these stories. I got some stories from my dad, but most of these stories I got through research. I mean, this is a heavily researched book. I mean, I joke about it and stuff like that, but there's a lot of information. I've actually got a bibliography on my website if anybody's interested. But there's a lot of stories out there, a lot of books out there, and of course, Tootsie's a fictional character, so he wasn't there, but I put him there. It's kind of like Forrest Gump. You remember Forrest Gump? Okay. Anyway, my subplots are simpler, but they fit into Beck's rather difficult relationships with her father and her husband, who's been cheating on her and her son. Again, her father just doesn't get it. Why is she so upset? This man cheated on her once. What is she, like, stupid? But as the book progresses, she realizes that her inability to forgive her husband has a lot to do with her parents' dysfunctional relationship. her father cheated, and her mother kept taking him back. And so she obviously has this great fear of becoming a doormat like her mother. And now, Gabe, her son, because of the Asperger's, doesn't quite understand why she's so upset with her husband. And he's just constantly bugging her, why don't you take Dad back? Why did you throw Dad out? He doesn't get it. Okay. In this, on a more serious note, I also tried to, in this novel, I tried to explore the reasons so many Jewish men of my father's generation became gangsters or admired gangsters. You know, the economic and social issues. As you may or may not know, the heyday of the Jewish syndicate, well, most of the gangsters, was the 1920s, Prohibition, and this was many Jewish gangsters made a nice living smuggling in liquor from Europe and Canada and the Bahamas. It was a way to make a living. But think about the fact that this was at a time when anti-Semitism was the norm, frankly, and the likes of J.P. Morgan and General Motors weren't hiring Jewish young men. If you grew up in New York in the Lower East Side, where immigrants were concentrated, and this holds equally true for pretty much every immigrant group, you see criminals driving fast cars and carrying wads of cash, and you think, why not me? Okay, so it goes into that a little more deeply, but I wanted to mention some of those issues. A little on the future. In my next book, which should be out this fall, maybe earlier, Becks invades the insular world of South Beach Hasidism and also the South Beach club scene to find a killer. The next in the series will involve the Cuban Jewish community that moved to Miami after Castro rose to power.